What happens when the future you want scares everyone you love? The private fertility clinic was designed to feel neutral, tastefully plain walls, soft lighting, nothing that invited questions. A place built for rich men who didn't want to explain why they were there. Raymond sat alone in the consultation room, his fingers resting loosely on his knee. His custom suit was immaculate. His Rolex caught the morning light without trying. Everything about him suggested control. Except his face. He wasn't there for romance anymore. Love had failed him too many times. The last woman he trusted walked away the moment he talked about children. She said she wanted excitement, not responsibility. Fun, not a future. Raymond didn't argue. He just stopped believing. At 29 years old, Raymond Perry had accomplished what most men only dream about. He'd built a tech company from his college dorm room, a smart home device that helped ordinary families save on electricity bills. Simple idea. Revolutionary execution. By 24, he'd sold it for millions. The business magazines called him a visionary. His bank account agreed. But every night, he returned to a sprawling house in Virginia that echoed with his footsteps. Success, it turned out, made terrible company. Money couldn't hold a conversation. Awards didn't laugh at your jokes. And no amount of wealth could fill the empty chair across from you at dinner. Raymond had tried dating. God, had he tried. There were women, plenty of them, drawn to the lifestyle he could offer. Penthouses, private jets, vacation homes in places most people couldn't pronounce. They loved the perks. They loved being seen with him. But the moment he mentioned marriage, children, building something that mattered beyond the next Instagram post, they vanished. One girlfriend actually laughed when he brought up starting a family, said she wasn't ready to throw her life away. Another ghosted him completely after he casually mentioned wanting 2 or 3 kids someday. The pattern became exhausting, then painful, then something worse. Expected. So Raymond made a decision that surprised even himself. If he couldn't find a partner who wanted what he wanted, he'd do it alone. He'd researched it extensively, the way he researched everything. Virginia law permitted single men to pursue surrogacy. It wasn't common, but it was legal. Clinics existed that specialized in exactly this kind of situation. Men like him, successful, determined, childless, who refused to let biology or circumstance dictate their future. There was even a growing trend of single fathers choosing this path, especially after the pandemic made people reconsider what actually mattered in life. Raymond found a strange comfort in that. He wasn't alone in being alone. Still, sitting in that waiting room on a humid summer morning, beneath fluorescent lights, that tried too hard to be soothing. Raymond felt the weight of what he was about to do. This wasn't how he'd imagined it. Not even close. He'd pictured a loving wife beside him, squeezing his hand, both of them nervous and excited about baby names and nursery colors. Instead, he was here by himself, about to discuss egg donors and gestational carriers with a stranger who'd never know the ache in his chest. Around him, couples sat close together, whispering encouragements, their fingers intertwined. Their hopefulness only amplified his isolation. Raymond straightened his shoulders. Control had gotten him this far. Control had built his empire, made him wealthy, earned him respect. Surely control could get him through this too, even if control felt like the loneliest companion he'd ever had. Raymond Perry? A warm voice cut through his thoughts. He looked up, expecting the clinical professionalism he'd braced himself for. Instead, he froze. Walking toward him was a woman he hadn't seen in over a decade. A woman who knew him before the money, before the success, before the walls. Bianca, his childhood best friend. The girl who used to race him to the school bus. Who knew he was afraid of the dark when they were 10. Who hugged him tight the day his parents separated and promised they'd always be friends. She stopped mid-step, recognition flooding her face. Ray! Her eyes went wide, then softened with something like wonder. She was beautiful, a black woman in her late 20s, dressed in a navy blazer, her natural hair framing her face perfectly. But it was her eyes that grabbed him. Those same steady, kind eyes that had anchored him through childhood storms. Raymond stood slowly, his carefully constructed composure cracking. Bianca? For a moment, the clinic disappeared. The clinical walls, the nervous couples, the reason he was even there, all of it faded. He wasn't a lonely millionaire anymore. He was just Ray, and she was just B, the kids who built blanket forts and swore they'd stay friends forever, even after her family moved to Atlanta in middle school. They hugged, awkward at first, then surprisingly natural, like muscle memory. The heart never quite forgets. "I can't believe it's you," she breathed, pulling back with a laugh that sounded exactly like he remembered. "Look at you, all grown up and important." She gestured at his tailored suit with playful admiration. Raymond found himself smiling, genuinely smiling, for the first time in months. "Dr. Bianca, apparently." He nodded at her clinic badge. It read, "Bianca Okafor, fertility specialist." She grinned. "Just Bianca to you. Though yes, to my patients, it's Dr. Okafor." Her professionalism returned, gentle but present. "Come on back to my office. Looks like I'm your consultant today. Small world, right?" As Raymond followed her down the hallway, his heart hammered with something that wasn't anxiety anymore. Coincidence? Fate? Whatever it was, it felt significant. He'd come here resigned to doing life alone. And somehow, impossibly, life had just handed him back someone who knew him before he learned to be lonely. The question was, what would he do with this second chance he never asked for? Bianca's office was smaller than Raymond expected, but warmer. Photographs lined the walls, families holding newborns, their faces radiating the kind of joy that money couldn't manufacture. Success stories, hope made visible. She caught him looking and smiled softly. "Those are some of the families we've helped. I like to remind myself why I do this work." Her voice carried the same gentle conviction he remembered from childhood, when they'd stayed up late, working on science projects, Bianca insisting they could figure anything out if they just kept trying. Raymond sat across from her desk, suddenly aware of how strange this was. His best friend from childhood, lost for over a decade, was now the person who'd guide him through one of the most vulnerable decisions of his life. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. Bianca opened a file, her fingers professional and efficient, but her eyes kept drifting back to him with something like disbelief. "So," she began, her tone careful, "I know why most people come here, but I need to ask for the record. What brings you to our clinic, Raymond?" The question hung between them. Raymond looked down at his hands. He'd rehearsed versions of this answer with other doctors, other agencies, but telling Bianca felt different, harder, like admitting defeat to someone who'd once believed he could do anything. He took a breath. "I want to become a father," he said quietly, "and I've given up on waiting for the right partner to do it with." The words landed heavy in the small room. Bianca didn't flinch, didn't offer empty platitudes or probe with invasive questions. She simply nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice understanding. "That's a big decision, Raymond. I'm sure you've thought a lot about it." "You have no idea." He exhaled with a wry chuckle that didn't quite reach his eyes. And then, slowly, like a dam beginning to crack, Raymond started talking. He told her about the company he'd built, the tech product that ended up in households across America. Bianca beamed with genuine pride at that, saying she remembered how he was always inventing things as a kid, always sketching designs in the margins of his homework. He told her about the relationships that unraveled the moment he mentioned children, women who wanted the lifestyle but not the responsibility, who saw him as an adventure, not a future. "It seemed like every woman I met either wanted a good time and nothing more, or the moment I brought up settling down, having kids, they disappeared." His tone was matter-of-fact, emotionally controlled, but Bianca could hear the hurt underneath, the rejection, the slow erosion of hope. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That must have been hard." Raymond shrugged, playing it off the way successful men do when they're trained never to show weakness. "I guess success scared some people away. Or maybe I just picked the wrong ones." He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. "Anyway, I realized I'm not getting any younger, and being a dad is too important to me. I don't want to miss my chance waiting for a Mrs. Perry who may never show up." As he spoke, he realized he was confessing one of his deepest wounds to someone he hadn't seen since high school. Yet it felt natural, safe. Bianca was listening the way she always had, intently, without judgment, as if his pain actually mattered. What Raymond didn't know was that Bianca's heart was breaking for him. She'd always known him as the ambitious dreamer, yes, but also the boy who volunteered at the animal shelter every Saturday, who tutored her in math when she was struggling, who had a generous, caring side that the world seemed determined to overlook. It pained her that someone like Raymond, someone who so clearly valued family, had been left feeling this alone. In her line of work, she'd met others in his position, men and women pursuing parenthood solo, not out of choice, but out of defeat. She'd read articles about single men turning to surrogacy, carrying what researchers called latent grief for the traditional family they'd imagined but never found. Listening to Raymond now, she could see that grief flickering behind his controlled exterior like a candle fighting wind. She took a careful breath and shifted into her professional role, hoping she could both help her old friend and make him feel less isolated in this decision. "Ray, I want you to know you're not the only one making this kind of choice. There are other single men and women who decide to become parents on their own. Actually, more single men have pursued surrogacy in recent years than ever before. A lot of people realized what truly matters is having someone to love and care for. You're not strange or wrong for wanting this." Raymond's shoulders relaxed slightly, relief washing over features that had been tense since he walked in. Hearing that validation from Bianca, someone he inherently trusted, meant more than any generic reassurance from a stranger ever could. He hadn't realized until that moment how much he'd needed to be told he wasn't failing at life by choosing this path. Bianca then outlined the process with the perfect blend of clinical precision and human warmth. She explained egg donors, surrogate screening, the legal requirements specific to Virginia. Since you're single, the contract needs court approval, and after the birth you'd file documentation to ensure you're listed as the sole parent on the birth certificate, she explained. "It's all very doable, just paperwork. We'll guide you through every step." Raymond nodded, appreciating how thorough yet caring she was. There was that signature Bianca combination, competent but kind. He remembered how in middle school she was the one who could calm him before big exams by logically explaining the material, then giving him an encouraging pat on the shoulder. Some things, he realized with a smile, never change. They discussed timelines, costs, medical procedures, but underneath the professional conversation, something else was happening. An undercurrent of personal connection flowed between them that neither could quite ignore. Their eyes would meet and they'd share small smiles, as if both were silently marveling, "I can't believe it's you after all this time." The clinical discussion would pause for quick asides. "Do you still draw?" Raymond asked suddenly. "You were always sketching in class." Bianca laughed. "Not as much as I should. Do you remember when we tried to build that treehouse in your backyard?" Tried being the operative word. Raymond grinned. "Pretty sure we created a safety hazard, not a treehouse." They both laughed, the sound easy and natural, before gently steering back to the medical conversation. A rhythm was forming, a slow reweaving of friendship that felt both strange and inevitable. After about an hour, Bianca had covered the essentials. "I know this is a lot of information," she said kindly, closing the file. "You don't have to decide everything today. We usually schedule a follow-up to discuss donor profiles once you've had time to process." Then she added, with a slightly shy smile, on a personal note, "It really is good to see you, Ray. I've wondered how you were doing over the years." Raymond couldn't help but grin, his blue eyes brightening for the first time in months. "I'm glad to see you too. I had no idea you were back in Virginia, let alone working here. It's unbelievable." The word didn't quite capture it. Miraculous, maybe, or terrifying. Because seeing Bianca again was complicating the simple, controlled plan he'd walked in with. They agreed he'd return in 2 weeks for the next appointment. As Raymond stood to leave, he felt a reluctance he couldn't quite name. He didn't want this reconnection to end so quickly. On impulse, the same impulse that had once made him climb trees and take risks before success. taught him to be careful. He said, "Bianca, would you maybe like to catch up sometime? Outside of all this?" He gestured around the office. A warning voice in his head said, "Don't be inappropriate. She's a professional and you're technically a client." But she'd been his friend first, long before she became Dr. Okafor, and the words came from that deeper place in his heart. Bianca hesitated for only a fraction of a second. "I'd love that. How about we exchange numbers? We can find a time." They traded contacts, both feeling a quiet excitement that had nothing to do with fertility, treatments, and everything to do with something neither was ready to name yet. As Raymond walked out of the clinic into the humid Virginia morning, the sun felt warmer on his face. His mood had shifted. He'd arrived hollow, braced for clinical conversations about donors and contracts, but he was leaving with something unexpected, a spark of hope he hadn't felt in years. Life, it seemed, had other plans. The question was whether Raymond would be brave enough to follow them. True to their word, Raymond and Bianca met the following weekend at a small cafe in Richmond. Raymond arrived early, nervous in a way that high-stakes business meetings never made him. This wasn't business. This was personal. And personal mattered in ways that profit margins never could. He'd spent the past week thinking about Bianca, more than he probably should have. He told himself it was just nostalgia, catching up with an old friend, but there was a pull he couldn't ignore, a quiet what-if whispering in the back of his mind that he kept trying to silence. Bianca entered wearing jeans and a marigold blouse that brought out the warmth in her brown skin. Their eyes met across the cafe, and both broke into immediate smiles. They hugged, a natural warm embrace, and settled at a corner table away from the afternoon crowd. For the first few minutes, conversation flowed effortlessly. They laughed, discovering he still took 2 sugars in his coffee, and she still scrunched her nose when she laughed. Those familiar quirks became bridges across the years apart. Soon they were diving deeper, sharing the stories of lives lived separately. Bianca described how her family moved to Atlanta when she was 13 after her mother landed a major job opportunity. The transition was brutal, leaving behind her best friend Raymond and the Virginia life she knew. But her parents, deeply rooted in their community, found them a close-knit neighborhood in Georgia. Bianca's world had been filled with what she called the beautiful chaos of black family life. Big Sunday dinners after church where everyone was considered family, whether blood-related or not. Summers with cousins running through sprinklers at cookouts, her grandmother, his endless wisdom guiding her through awkward teenage years. "My grandma used to say, 'Baby, money and success are nice, but they can't keep you warm at night. Family will,'" Bianca shared, her voice soft with memory. "Those words shaped everything for me." Raymond listened, captivated. He tried to picture her world, so full of community, support, and belonging. It sounded like something from a movie, warm, alive, the opposite of his own experience. Bianca explained how her passion for science and helping others led her to reproductive health. "I love my job," she admitted, her eyes bright. "But it can be emotionally heavy. Not every story has a happy ending, and even the successful ones usually come after heartbreak. I try to be steady support for my clients through it all." Raymond found himself admiring her deeply. Here was someone who channeled her talents into helping others create the families they desperately wanted. It was meaningful, in ways his tech innovations never quite reached. He saw how she recounted experiences, staying after hours to console a couple after failed IVF, celebrating with families who finally got their positive test. She really cares, he thought, something warm blooming in his chest. When it was his turn, Raymond opened up in ways he rarely did. He described college at UVA, the late nights working on his smart home device idea, turning a dorm room project into a startup. By 24, a larger company acquired it, making him wealthier than he'd ever imagined. He relocated to Northern Virginia to expand his ventures. "It's ironic," he said with self-deprecating honesty. "I made something to improve people's everyday lives, yet my own life outside of work wasn't improving at all." He confessed that after his success, he found himself surrounded by people eager to please but few he could genuinely trust. He told her about the ex-girlfriend who seemed ready for commitment until he mentioned wanting kids soon. Then she vanished. Another woman who admitted she was more interested in luxury trips than building a home. Over time, I just withdrew, Raymond said quietly. It seemed easier to focus on work than risk that kind of rejection again. Bianca nodded, understanding more than he realized. It's a form of control, isn't it? Focusing on what you can control to avoid what you can't. Her insight cut right to the heart of it. Raymond had power in business but emptiness in his personal life. He could command a boardroom but couldn't control the loneliness that followed him home each night. Her words made him look at her thoughtfully. Exactly. And going to the clinic, that was me taking control, or trying to. He sighed, his guard dropping further. Though now that I've run into you, it doesn't feel like a straightforward plan anymore. Bianca's heart skipped. She stirred her coffee, choosing words carefully. How do you mean? Raymond met her gaze, his eyes vulnerable in a way that probably terrified him. I mean, seeing you again has been this bright spot I didn't expect. I didn't realize how much I missed having someone I truly connect with. It's been a long time since I've had a friend like you, B. The old nickname slipped out naturally, making her smile. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. A small gesture, but full of care and meaning. I'm really glad we reconnected. You were my best friend too, Ray. I've missed this. There was emotion in her voice, carefully restrained but genuine. Neither said more. Not yet. They just held that moment, hand over hand for an extra beat, before both shyly pulled back. The next hour passed in a comfortable blur of childhood memories, favorite music, college stories. Each was discovering who the other had become, while finding that the core of the person they'd cherished was still there. Intimacy was building slowly, not through grand romantic declarations, but through laughter and listening, through the simple act of being present with each other. As they prepared to leave, Raymond felt that same reluctance from the clinic. He didn't want this to end. My company's sponsoring a charity art gala next Friday, he said, trying to sound casual. If you're free, would you like to come as my guest? No pressure, just a fancy cocktail thing. Could be fun. His hopeful eyes betrayed the casual tone. Bianca hesitated, and Raymond's heart sank slightly. I'd like to, she said carefully. But are you sure it's okay? I mean, I am technically your consultant for the surrogacy. I wouldn't want to blur any lines or cause problems. Raymond's face fell. He hadn't thought of that. The professional boundary, the ethics. But Bianca, seeing his disappointment, quickly added, However, I can refer you to another consultant if you want. It's totally allowed. We have several specialists. I could transfer your case to someone else on the team. He looked surprised. Wouldn't that be a hassle? Are you sure? Bianca shrugged lightly, a small smile playing on her lips. It's not uncommon. Sometimes clients prefer someone else for various reasons. In this case, I think it might actually be best. That way we can reconnect freely as friends, and you'll still get excellent care from my colleague. She paused, then joked. Besides, I'd hate for you to hold back asking questions just because I'm too close. This is too important for you. Raymond felt a weight lift that he hadn't realized was pressing on him. All right, let's do that. Though I'll still want your opinion if I'm unsure about something. Bianca laughed, the sound like music he'd forgotten he loved. Try and stop me. They parted with genuine excitement about the gala. As Bianca drove home, she felt nervous butterflies about attending such a high-profile event, especially as Raymond's guest. Guest? Date? She caught herself. It's just as friends for now. She couldn't deny the attraction forming, the way her pulse quickened when he smiled at her, but she was determined not to rush or assume his intentions. After all, Raymond had just come to her clinic planning to have a baby alone. That plan was presumably still in motion. Bianca reminded herself to guard her heart carefully. Safety over fear. She would protect herself until she knew it was truly safe to let him in completely. But even as she thought it, she knew her heart was already halfway gone. The night of the gala arrived heavy with possibility. Raymond waited at the entrance, hands clasped, looking every bit the young tech mogul in his charcoal suit. But he wasn't thinking about publicity or networking. He was scanning the crowd anxiously for Bianca, hoping she wouldn't feel out of place in his world. When she stepped out of the taxi, his breath caught audibly. She wore an elegant dark green dress that complemented her figure and skin tone perfectly. Her natural curls were swept up, and a delicate gold necklace, perhaps a family heirloom, graced her collarbone. She was stunning, but she also looked uncertain as she approached the red carpet area, her eyes taking in the cameras and the elite crowd with something like apprehension. Raymond immediately went to her side. "Bianca, you look amazing," he said, genuine awe in his voice. She blushed, thanking him softly, and when he offered his arm, she took it with visible relief. Inside, the gala buzzed with Virginia's power players, entrepreneurs, politicians, artists, old money, and new. As they made their rounds, Bianca observed Raymond in his element. He was confident but never arrogant, gracious with everyone who approached. More than once he introduced her with unmistakable pride. "This is my good friend, Dr. Bianca Okafor." He made sure people treated her with respect, and he stayed by her side, instinctively sensing this world was foreign to her. Bianca did feel like a fish out of water initially. She noticed she was one of very few black women in the room who weren't working as event staff, and certainly the only one on the arm of a high-profile white CEO. Curious glances came their way, some friendly, others less so. But Raymond's presence was steadying. When an acquaintance made what could only be called a microaggression, "So, Bianca, which hospital do you nurse at?" Assuming she couldn't possibly be a doctor, Raymond smoothly but firmly corrected them. "Actually, Bianca is a physician and fertility specialist. She helps build families." His tone was polite, but left no room for further assumptions. The person flushed and stammered an apology. Under the table, Raymond gently squeezed Bianca's hand. A silent, "I've got your back." In that moment, Bianca realized she felt safe with him beside her, even in an environment designed to make people like her feel small. As the evening progressed, they found themselves less interested in networking and more engrossed in each other. They drifted to a quieter corner after dinner. A jazz band played softly. Raymond asked Bianca to dance. "I'm not much of a ballroom dancer," she warned. He smiled. That genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Neither am I. Let's be amateurs together." On the dance floor, they swayed simply, a side-to-side shuffle that allowed them to be close and talk softly. This was another moment of quiet intimacy, feeling each other's warmth, trusting each other's lead, existing in a bubble separate from the crowd around them. Bianca felt her heart pounding as Raymond's hand rested respectfully on her back. He was reveling in the closeness, the light scent of her perfume, the way her eyes reflected the golden lights, the rightness of having her in his arms. "You know," he murmured, his voice low and intimate, "I can't remember the last time I actually enjoyed one of these events. I usually feel like I'm performing, but with you here it's different. I'm just me." Bianca looked up at him, her eyes soft. "The real you is pretty great," she said, then added with a teasing smile, "I mean, who else would? Crush my 8th grade dream of starting a band by pointing out neither of us could sing." He laughed, the sound freer than it had been in years. "I never did apologize for crushing your rock star dreams, did I?" They both giggled, and then fell into a comfortable silence as the music swelled around them. In that gentle quiet, something profound was shifting. Raymond's carefully constructed walls were crumbling. Bianca's caution was melting. What remained was tender vulnerability that both exhilarated and terrified them. By the time the gala ended, they were famished, having barely touched the fancy hors d'oeuvres and giddy from the emotional closeness. Raymond insisted on stopping at a late-night diner he loved, trading champagne for burgers and milkshakes. There, Bianca kicked off her heels under the booth with a sigh of relief, and they talked like two people who had, long ago, decided to accept each other completely. They shared quiet confessions. Raymond admitted he was dreading going home to his empty house after feeling so connected tonight, a vulnerable admission of how much her company meant to him. Bianca, in turn, confessed that since moving back to Virginia 2 years ago, she hadn't made many close friends. She'd buried herself in work and family obligations, wary after a previous relationship ended badly. "This is the first night in a long time I've just enjoyed myself without looking over my shoulder," she said softly. Raymond listened more than he spoke, really listened in the way that makes someone feel seen. He'd read somewhere that trust isn't built by what you say, but by what you do consistently over time. So he showed Bianca through small actions that she mattered. He gave her his full attention, put his phone away completely, refilled her, water when it ran low, walked on the curb side of the street when escorting her to her car because he'd once read that's what gentlemen did to keep women safe from splashing carriages, an old-fashioned gesture that made her smile. These weren't grand romantic gestures or rehearsed lines. They were repeated, quiet behaviors that spoke volumes. And Bianca noticed every single one. Each small act was like a brick being carefully laid in the foundation of trust building between them. Outside the diner, under the glow of streetlights, they lingered. The night air was thick with possibility, with the weight of something unspoken but deeply felt. Raymond gently brushed a loose curl away from Bianca's face, his fingers barely grazing her skin. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. "I had an amazing time." She looked up at him, her brown eyes luminous. "Me too," she whispered. Her gaze drifted to his lips, then back up to his eyes. Time seemed to slow, the world narrowing to just the two of them. Raymond leaned in slightly, testing the waters, his intention clear. Almost there. Almost. But a sudden shout from across the street shattered the moment. Late-night revelers, calling loudly to a friend, their voices cutting through the intimate bubble. Bianca jumped slightly, and the spell broke. They both laughed, nervous and breathless. Almost. But not yet. They hugged goodbye instead, a warm, lingering embrace that left them both glowing. But they held back from crossing that final line into a kiss. They weren't quite ready. Or maybe the story wasn't ready. They each drove home that night with full hearts, wondering what exactly was blooming between them and where it might lead. The tension of that almost kiss hung in the air between them, unresolved and electric. Over the next few weeks, Raymond and Bianca settled into something beautiful and terrifying, a pattern of consistent presence. They spoke or messaged nearly every day. What started as friendly check-ins evolved into deeper conversations as trust grew layer by layer. They showed up for each other, not with fireworks, but with steady, reliable light. For Raymond, this was revolutionary. He found himself doing something unthinkable, rearranging his packed schedule to make time for Bianca. He'd leave the office early to have dinner with her, block out long lunches to visit museums she wanted to see, cancel conference calls to drive her to a doctor's appointment when her car was in the shop. These adjustments would have been impossible for the workaholic he used to be. But priorities were shifting fundamentally. He was changing through actions, not words. Business could no longer consume every waking hour when someone special was bringing light into his days. Bianca noticed these changes and appreciated them deeply. She too made space in her life, taking evenings off from reviewing patient files to attend concerts with Raymond, giving up precious Sunday morning sleep-ins to go hiking at Shenandoah, where they laughed at how out-of-shape city life had made them both. Bit by bit, choice by choice, they were prioritizing presence over other obligations. They were choosing each other. During these times, they learned more about each other's families and worlds. Raymond finally opened up about his own family background, and it wasn't that the picture-perfect story people might assume from his success. His parents divorced when he was 12. His father, a reserved man who worked in finance, moved to another state. They spoke occasionally but weren't close. His mother remarried and spent much of her time traveling. They loved each other, but there was distance there, emotional and physical. Holidays were always the hardest, Raymond admitted one evening as they walked along the James River. I'd sometimes spend Thanksgiving with college friends or just work through Christmas. It was easier than facing the empty house and remembering what family gatherings used to feel like. Bianca, who came from a large, tight-knit extended family, had trouble imagining that level of aloneness. The holidays for her meant chaos, dozens of people, too much food, laughter, arguments, reconciliations, life happening loudly and messily. She couldn't picture spending them alone. So she gently began pulling Raymond into her world. One Saturday afternoon, she invited him to a backyard barbecue at her parents' home in a Richmond suburb. "Are you sure I won't be intruding?" he asked, genuinely concerned. She assured him he'd be welcome. Her parents remembered him fondly from childhood, and they were excited that their bye-bye, her dad's nickname for her, had reconnected with her old friend. That afternoon changed something in Raymond. He arrived with flowers for her mother and wine for her father, uncertain what to expect. He was immediately enveloped, quite literally, by Bianca's family. Her mother hugged him warmly at the door. "We're so happy to see you again, sweetheart." The scene was beautifully chaotic. Uncles manning the grill with chicken and ribs, little nieces and nephews playing tag in the yard, neighbors from down the street who felt like family chatting loudly on the porch. The air smelled of charcoal smoke, barbecue sauce, and spices Raymond couldn't name. Motown classics played from a speaker someone had set up. Laughter punctuated every conversation. At first, Raymond felt slightly out of place as one of the few white faces there, but any awkwardness evaporated almost instantly because everyone treated him like he'd always belonged. Bianca's cousins challenged him to horseshoes. The kids roped him into a water balloon fight, and Bianca nearly doubled over laughing watching. The composed CEO dodge and get absolutely soaked by a 7-year-old with surprising aim. He was having more genuine fun than he'd experienced in years. In the middle of it, wet shirt clinging to him, children's laughter ringing in his ears. The smell of home-cooked food in the air, Raymond felt a lump form in his throat. This was what he'd been longing for without quite knowing how to name it. The noise, the warmth, the feeling of belonging to something larger than himself. It was chaotic in the best possible way, the complete opposite of his sterile, silent penthouse. Later, Raymond found himself sitting with Bianca's father and a couple of her uncles, cold beers in hand. They asked respectfully about his work and life, their straightforward sincerity, refreshing after years of people asking questions with ulterior motives. One uncle joked, "All that money, no wife? We might have to find you a good woman in this family." Raymond flushed, but Bianca's father gently chided, "Leave him alone. He's doing just fine." Still, Raymond couldn't suppress a secret smile, thinking I might have already found one, as he watched Bianca across the yard patiently braiding a younger cousin's hair, her face serene and beautiful in the golden afternoon light. Later that evening, as the party wound down and fireflies began blinking, in the twilight, Bianca and Raymond sat together on the porch swing. They observed the happy chaos, kids being rounded up, leftovers being packed, uncles still debating sports, aunties planning the next gathering. Raymond was quiet, pensive. Bianca noticed and nudged him lightly. "Penny for your thoughts?" He took a long moment before responding, his voice thick with emotion he was struggling to contain. "I'm just taking this all in. Your family, this community, the way everyone just shows up for each other. It's wonderful. You're lucky, you know." His eyes were shiny, emotion barely held in check. Bianca looped her arm through his, an instinctive gesture of comfort and connection. "I do know. Sometimes, I guess I took it for granted, but working in my field, seeing how many people long for exactly this kind of support." She trailed off, realizing fully how different his upbringing had been from hers. How lonely. Impulsively, she rested her head on his shoulder. "You're not alone anymore, Ray," she whispered. The words were simple but carried enormous weight. It was the closest either had come to naming what was happening between them. Raymond felt a surge of emotion so powerful it almost overwhelmed him. This simple statement meant more than any business achievement ever had. He gently rested his cheek against her hair, breathing in her scent, feeling her warmth. "Thanks to you," he murmured back. They stayed like that, side by side on the creaking porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the Virginia twilight. It was a moment of chosen togetherness that didn't need dramatizing with grand declarations. It was understood, felt, real. Safety was slowly replacing fear, his fear of loneliness and rejection, her fear of being hurt again and making the wrong choice. In place of fear, A calm sense of trust was growing, steady and sure as a tree putting down deep roots. But even in this beautiful moment, neither was quite ready to name what they were becoming to each other. The words remained unspoken. The future remained uncertain. And somewhere in the back of Raymond's mind, a question still lingered like a ghost. What about the plan? What about becoming a father? What about the clinic, the surrogates, the carefully controlled path he'd set himself on before Bianca walked back into his life? That question would demand an answer soon, because life, as Raymond was learning, rarely lets you avoid the hard choices forever. Sometimes it forces your hand in the most unexpected ways. And when it did, Raymond would have to decide, did he want control or did he want love? Could he have both? Or would choosing one mean losing the other? The answer was coming, whether he was ready for it or not. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, clinical and efficient. Raymond stared at his laptop screen in his downtown office. The subject line: reading, next steps, donor and surrogate profiles available for review. He'd been expecting it. His consultant at the fertility clinic, Bianca's colleague, was moving his case forward exactly as planned. Attached were profiles, photographs, medical histories, women willing to carry a child for him, egg donors with detailed backgrounds, education, interests, physical characteristics, everything laid out like a catalogue. Everything he'd thought he wanted just weeks ago. But now, staring at those profiles, Raymond felt something unexpected. Not excitement, not relief, just confusion. Because his life no longer looked like it had when he first walked into that clinic. The emptiness that drove him there had been filled by something, someone, he never anticipated. Bianca's laugh, her presence at dinner, the way she texted him good morning without fail, the comfort of knowing someone was thinking about him. For the first time in years, his house didn't feel empty when he came home, because he'd spend the evening on the phone with her, talking about nothing and everything. His carefully constructed plan to become a single father suddenly felt like a solution to a problem that no longer existed. Or did it? Was he being foolish, putting his dreams on hold for a relationship that was still so new, still undefined? What if this didn't work out? What if he was trading certainty for a risk that would leave him with nothing? That evening, Bianca came over to his place for their weekly cooking tradition. They'd been working through her mother's recipe book. Tonight was shrimp and grits, a dish Bianca promised would change his life. She arrived with a bag of groceries, and that smile that made his chest tighten in the best way. They fell into their comfortable rhythm, her chopping vegetables, him handling the shrimp, both moving around his kitchen like they'd done this for years instead of weeks. Music played softly in the background. Everything felt natural, right. But Bianca noticed something was off. Raymond kept pausing mid-task, his mind clearly elsewhere. He'd been chopping the same pepper for what felt like 5 minutes, the pieces getting smaller and smaller. "What's on your mind?" she finally asked, setting down her wooden spoon. "You've been demolishing that pepper." Raymond set down the knife. His hands were steady, but his heart was racing. He realized he needed to talk this through, and there was only one person he trusted enough for this conversation. Only one person who would understand what he was really asking. "I got an email from the clinic today," he said quietly. "They want me to choose a donor and surrogate, to move forward with everything." The words hung heavy in the warm kitchen. Bianca paused what she was doing, her back still to him for a moment as she processed. Then she turned, her expression careful, neutral. "Oh," she said softly. "How do you feel about that?" He wiped his hands on a dish towel, buying time to find the right words. "Honestly, I'm conflicted. Before it was simple, no second thoughts. I was ready to do this, to become a father on my own terms." He paused, meeting her eyes. "But now, things are different. These past couple of months with you, I didn't expect any of this, but it's made me wonder if I should wait. If I should." He trailed off, uncertain how to finish. Bianca's heart was hammering. She moved closer, her voice gentle but needing clarity. "What are you saying, Raymond?" Her use of his full name signaled how serious this moment was. He stepped toward her, closing the distance between them, and took her hands. One still had flour dusted on it from the batter she'd been mixing. The domestic intimacy of it, the ordinariness, made what he was about to say feel even more significant. I'm saying that meeting you again was the best thing that could have happened to me. You've made me feel something I thought I'd never feel again. His voice wavered slightly with raw honesty, the kind of vulnerability that terrified men like him. I don't want to lose what we have, and I can't pretend I don't wish for more than what we've named so far. Bianca felt her throat tighten with emotion, hope and fear and love all tangled together. Ray, are you sure? She needed to ask, needed to hear him say it clearly, because her cautious heart required that assurance. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere as your friend. But having more, that's a big step. You were ready to become a single dad. I wouldn't want you to give up that dream if we don't work out. The vulnerability in her voice matched his. They were both standing on the edge of something that could be beautiful or devastating. Raymond gently squeezed her hands. His blue eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. The dream has always been to have a family. I was going to settle for doing it alone because I'd lost hope. But you... He smiled, and his eyes were openly wet now, tears threatening to spill. You've given me hope again. Real hope. With you by my side, I feel like the family I always dreamed of is possible, the way I truly wanted it, with love, with partnership, not just contracts and clinical procedures and doing it alone because I couldn't find the right person. He took a shaky breath. I think I found the right person, B. I think I found her the moment she called my name in that clinic. A tear slipped down Bianca's cheek at his words. She'd been holding back for weeks, protecting herself, being cautious and measured. But his honesty broke through every wall she'd built. Raymond reached up with one hand and gently brushed the tear away, his thumb lingering on her cheek. I haven't formally said this, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper now, but I think I fell in love with you a little bit the moment I saw you in that clinic doorway, and every day since, I've fallen a little more. I'm all the way in love with you now, Bianca, completely. Bianca let out a soft laugh that was half relief, half joy, the sound breaking free from somewhere deep in her chest. I have been so scared to acknowledge it, she confessed, her own tears flowing freely now. I was afraid it was just nostalgia or wishful thinking, or that I was projecting what I wanted onto what we actually had. But it's not. It's real. I love you, Ray. I love you so much. The words, simple, powerful, true, were finally spoken, not in a dramatic movie proclamation with sweeping music, but in a kitchen that smelled of butter and garlic, surrounded by half-prepared food and everyday life. It felt exactly right. It felt earned by every small moment that had built to this one. They moved toward each other as one, and finally kissed. It was gentle at first, tentative, testing, and then deeper as weeks of restrained longing poured into it. Raymond's hands found her waist, pulling her closer. Bianca's arms wrapped around his neck. There were no fireworks exploding outside, no orchestral score swelling dramatically. Just the sound of Raymond's heartbeat thundering in his ears and Bianca's content sigh as she melted into his arms. This wasn't a whirlwind infatuation based on attraction alone. This was a homecoming. Both felt an overwhelming sense of peace in that embrace, as if they'd been searching for this exact place, this exact person, their entire lives without knowing it. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and smiling, Bianca whispered, "The grits are probably ruined." Raymond laughed, the sound freer and lighter than she'd ever heard from him. "I don't care. We'll order pizza. This is more important." They did order pizza. And that night, curled up together on his couch with a movie neither of them watched, they talked for hours about the future. Not as a vague concept, but as something real and tangible they were building together. Raymond shared his vision. Not a 5-year business plan with projected profits and market expansion, but a life plan. A life where he and Bianca came home to each other every evening. Where their children, yes, children, they shyly acknowledged they both wanted more than one eventually, would grow up surrounded by the love and support they were now creating. Bianca shared her own hopes, admitting she'd actually considered freezing her eggs a year ago. uncertain if she'd find the right person in time to start a family naturally. "I was starting to think maybe I'd have to do it alone too," she confessed, "or maybe give up on the idea entirely. But now," she smiled up at him, her head resting on his chest, "now those worries feel far away." They discussed practical things too. Raymond said he'd put the surrogacy plans on indefinite hold. He'd call the clinic tomorrow and let them know. He even mentioned an idea that had been forming, maybe funding a scholarship or grant program for families who needed fertility treatments but couldn't afford them. Inspired by Bianca's work and compassion, he wanted to help others achieve what he now had hope of achieving naturally. Bianca was moved to tears again hearing this. It showed how much he'd grown, how his values were shifting from accumulation to contribution, from material success to emotional meaning. As dawn neared, they fell asleep in each other's arms right there on the couch, too content and exhausted to move. Both felt a profound stability settling into their souls. The long, painful chapter of loneliness in Raymond's life was finally closing. A new chapter, full of presence, trust, and chosen family, was beginning. And for Bianca, the caution and fear she'd carried since her last relationship ended were dissolving. This felt safe. This felt right. This felt like forever. The months that followed were not without challenges, but they were, filled with a kind of joy both had thought might never be theirs. Raymond and Bianca dated officially, navigating the beautiful mess of merging their lives. She met his business associates, and while some were surprised by the relationship, Raymond made it clear that anyone who couldn't respect Bianca wasn't worth his time. His priorities had fundamentally shifted. Board meetings could wait. Investor calls could be rescheduled. But dinner with Bianca? That was sacred. Time with her family? Non-negotiable. His colleagues noticed the change in him. He smiled more, stressed less, seemed more present in conversations, rather than always mentally calculating the next move. Bianca's family embraced Raymond completely. Her father started calling him son, which made Raymond's eyes well up the first time it happened. Her mother frequently sent him home with containers of leftovers, insisting he was too skinny despite him being perfectly healthy. Her nieces and nephews adopted him as Uncle Ray, demanding he come to birthday parties and school events. For Raymond, who'd spent holidays alone for years, this integration into a loving family was almost overwhelming. The first Thanksgiving he spent with Bianca's family, surrounded by dozens of people, loud conversations, and more food than seemed humanly possible. He had to excuse himself to the bathroom for a moment, not because he was uncomfortable, but because he was so overwhelmed with gratitude he needed a moment to compose himself. 6 months into their relationship, on a quiet Saturday morning walk through Maymont Park, Raymond stopped beneath an old oak tree. Bianca, who'd been talking about a challenging case at work, paused when she realized he wasn't beside her anymore. She turned back to find him down on one knee, a small velvet box in his hand. Her breath caught. "Bianca," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion clearly written. On his face I spent years thinking I'd have to do life alone, that I'd missed my chance at this, but you proved me wrong in the best possible way. You're my best friend. You're the love I thought I'd lost. You're everything I didn't know I was still allowed to hope for." He opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring. "Will you marry me?" Bianca's hands flew to her mouth, tears already streaming. "Yes," she managed through her sobs. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger and they embraced there under the oak tree, both crying and laughing at the same time. A passing jogger congratulated them. A couple with a stroller stopped to clap. In that moment, surrounded by strangers celebrating their happiness, Raymond felt something he'd never quite felt before, the sense that the universe was exactly as it should be, that every rejection, every lonely night, every moment of despair had been leading him here, to this woman, to this moment, to this life. They married 3 months later in an intimate ceremony that reflected who they were. No over the top fanfare or society page spectacle, just a gathering of the people who mattered most. Bianca's extended family filled most of the seats. Raymond's mother flew in and cried happy tears throughout the entire ceremony, later telling him, "I've never seen you this happy, sweetheart. This is what I always wanted for you." A few of Raymond's close friends from college attended, amazed at the transformation in him. The ceremony took place under an old oak tree in Bianca's parents' backyard, the same yard where they'd had that barbecue where Raymond had first experienced what real family felt like. Raymond wore a linen suit. Bianca wore a lace gown that had belonged to her grandmother. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to be each other's safe harbor, to choose presence over convenience, to build a family rooted in love rather than obligation. When the officiant pronounced them married and Raymond kissed his wife, for the first time, the applause from their loved ones was thunderous. But all Raymond could hear was his own heart, steady and sure, finally at peace. The reception was exactly what you'd expect from Bianca's family. Loud, joyful chaos. Music, dancing, too much food, children running everywhere, uncles telling embarrassing stories, aunties offering marriage advice. Raymond found himself pulled into the center of it all, dancing with Bianca to their song, then being dragged into a group dance he had no idea how to do, everyone laughing as he tried to keep up. He'd never felt more alive, never felt more like he belonged. As the evening wound down and the sun set over the yard, Raymond and Bianca stood, together at the edge of the celebration, watching their families mingle. "What are you thinking?" Bianca asked, lacing her fingers through his. Raymond smiled, pulling her close. "I'm thinking about how different my life is now compared to what I thought it would be. How much better it is than anything I could have planned." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Life had other plans," she said softly. "Thank God it did," he replied. The months after the wedding brought a new kind of happiness, the everyday, kind that's easy to overlook but profound in its constancy. Raymond and Bianca moved into a house together, a charming older home in a neighborhood with big trees and friendly neighbors. They painted rooms together, argued playfully over furniture placement, created a space that felt like both of theirs. Raymond's penthouse, sterile and lonely, was sold without a second thought. This house, filled with Bianca's laughter and their shared life, was home in a way no luxury condo could ever be. And then, about 4 months after the wedding, Bianca came home from work with news that would change everything again. Raymond was in the kitchen making dinner. He'd actually learned to cook thanks to their weekly traditions. When she walked in with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Hey," he said, immediately sensing something significant. "Everything okay?" Bianca set down her bag, walked over to him, and without a word, handed him something. He looked down. A pregnancy test. Positive. His eyes shot up to hers, disbelief and joy warring on his face. Are we? He couldn't even finish the sentence. Bianca nodded, tears already forming. "We're having a baby, Ray." The spatula he'd been holding clattered to the floor as he pulled her into his arms, lifting her slightly off the ground, laughing and crying at the same time. "We're having a baby," he repeated, as if saying it again would make it feel more real. They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, both overwhelmed by the miracle of it. This wasn't how Raymond had planned to become a father. It was so much better. This was a child conceived in love, not in clinical procedures. A child who would grow up with 2 parents who chose each other, who fought through loneliness to find connection, who built something real and lasting. 1 year after that fateful meeting in the fertility clinic. 1 year after Raymond walked in planning to become a single father and walked out having found his best friend again. Raymond and Bianca sat on the front porch of their home on a crisp autumn evening. So much had changed, yet the changes had come naturally, without the dramatic upheaval Raymond once feared change would bring. Bianca was now 6 months pregnant, her belly showing enough that Raymond couldn't resist resting his hand there constantly. "Junior's kicking," he said with a chuckle, feeling a small thump against his palm. Bianca smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Probably doing somersaults after that ice cream I had." They'd decided not to find out the baby's sex, wanting the surprise. For now, Junior was the placeholder name that made them both smile. A gentle breeze stirred the wind chimes Bianca had hung on the porch. Inside, They'd painted what would be the nursery a sunny yellow. A crib stood in the corner, waiting. Everything about the scene spoke of stability, of warmth, of a life well built rather than hastily thrown together. There would be challenges ahead. They both knew parenthood and marriage had their difficult moments, but they felt ready to face them together. The dominant feeling now wasn't fear or anxiety. It was peace. Deep, abiding peace. Raymond thought back to the man he'd been when he first walked into that clinic, guarded, resigned, prepared to settle for a version of life that was less than what he truly wanted. He'd been willing to become a father alone because he'd given up on love, given up on finding someone who saw him for who he truly was, beyond the money and success. He glanced at Bianca now, his wife, his best friend, the love that arrived when he least expected it, and gratitude overwhelmed him. He had everything he'd ever truly needed. In letting go of rigid control and embracing vulnerability, in choosing to stay open to love. Even when it terrified him, he'd gained a life richer than any bank account could measure. Bianca turned to him, as if reading his thoughts the way she so often did. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked softly, echoing the question she'd asked him so many times over the past year. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling with contentment. "Just thinking about how lucky I am. How funny it is that I thought I'd be doing this alone, and instead you're stuck with me," she interrupted with a teasing bump of her shoulder against his. "Not stuck," he corrected gently, lifting her hand to kiss it. "Blessed with you. Blessed beyond measure." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn shades of lavender and orange as the sun dipped below the trees. This ending to their story wasn't a dramatic climax with soaring music and grand gestures. It was a gentle unfolding, earned warmth after the cold loneliness both had endured. It was the reward for staying open, for being vulnerable, for choosing to show up day after day. Raymond inhaled the cool autumn air, remembering something Bianca had shared with him from a book she loved. Love arrives quietly, without labels or trumpets, and it stays through the mornings you choose to be present. He understood it now in a way he couldn't have a year ago. Their love wasn't built on a single grand declaration made in a moment of passion. It was built on daily acts of care, on listening when the other needed to talk, on showing up when it would have been easier to stay away. It was the dinners they cooked side by side, the morning walks before work, the late-night conversations about everything and nothing, the mutual respect for each other's dreams and fears. It was knowing that when Bianca had a long, emotionally draining day at the clinic, he'd have tea ready and a listening ear. It was knowing that when Raymond had a tough business decision, she'd sit with him and talk it through without judgment. Their trust was built on actions, not just words, on consistency, not grand gestures, on being present day after day, even when it wasn't convenient. As dusk settled fully around them, Bianca whispered, "Thank you for finding me again." Raymond responded, his voice thick with emotion, "Thank you for being there when I finally showed up." They both chuckled softly at the twist of fate that had reunited them. Whether you called it coincidence or destiny, it had given them a second chance that neither expected and both desperately needed. Inside the house, the phone rang. Ironically, it was the fertility clinic calling, to follow up, asking if Mr. Perry wanted to keep his file active. Raymond would call back tomorrow to thank them and formally close that chapter. He no longer needed surrogates or donors or clinical procedures to fulfill his dreams. Life, after all, had other plans, better plans than he could have ever designed himself. Hand in hand, Raymond and Bianca stayed on that porch until the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Their story ended as it began, with a choice. But unlike the lonely decision that opened this tale, the choices now were shared and full of hope. Together, they chose love over fear, trust over isolation, vulnerability over protective walls, presence over empty control. In the gentle Virginia night, with crickets beginning their evening serenade and the distant sound of neighbors calling children, inside, they felt the deep peace that comes from a love patiently built, brick by brick, moment by moment, choice by choice. They had earned this happiness through every risk they took, every wall they let down, every time they chose to show up when it would have been safer to retreat. This wasn't the ending. It was only the beginning of a new, richer chapter. And as Raymond sat there with his wife and their unborn child, surrounded by the warmth of the life they'd built, together, he finally understood something profound. The future you want doesn't scare the right people away. It draws them closer. And sometimes, the best plan is to let go of your plans entirely and trust that life knows what you need better than you do. So here's my question for you. What dream have you given up on because you couldn't see how it would happen? What hope have you buried because the path forward wasn't clear? Raymond thought his dream of family was dead. He was prepared to settle for a lesser version, to do it alone, to accept that love had passed him by. But life had other plans. Sometimes, the very moment you give up is the moment before everything changes. Sometimes, walking through the door feeling defeated is exactly when you meet the person who'll change everything. The question isn't whether you'll face disappointment or loneliness or plans that fall apart. The question is, will you stay open anyway? Will you choose vulnerability even when control feels safer? Will you let people in even when you've been hurt before? Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had a moment where giving up on one plan led you to something better? Or are you in that place right now, trying to control everything because trusting feels too risky? Share your story. Because here's what I know, you're not alone in this. Whatever you're facing, whatever dream you've buried, whatever hope you've given up on, there are others who've been there. And sometimes, just sometimes, sharing your story is the first step toward life surprising you with exactly what you need. So, go ahead, share, connect, stay open, because your story isn't over yet, and life might have other plans for you too, better ones than you can imagine. Hit that like button if this story touched you, subscribe for more stories about real people finding real love, and I'll see you in the next one.